We want to finish off by talking about Rachel Reeves. We've all interviewed her, and I got the chance to dig a little deeper 4 years ago. I can't believe it's 4 years now. Lewis, you were the producer of this podcast, when I interviewed her for another podcast that we had at the time called Acting Prime Minister, which offered political figures the chance to tell me what they'd do if they entered Downing Street. Labour at the time of this interview were trailing the Tories by 14 points in the polls. It was a whole other era. Now things have changed considerably, and they just switched leader, of course, from Corbyn to Starmer. This is Rachel Reeves in 2021 laying out her vision for power. If she was ever given the keys to number 10, of course, in the end she got them to number 11. Let's have a listen to it. Who's the first person you'd call as Prime Minister?
I think I'll probably phone up my children because they don't know that Labour wins elections. So I think they'd be delighted that there was a Labour person in number 10 Downing Street.
Tell me what Labour stands for then in these days under Keir Starmer. What is the party's ethos?
Labour are the party of ordinary working people and working families who have not had a good deal. Our communities and our town centres and our high streets have been hollowed out this last 10 years because of austerity, but also because the Tories, I think, neglect the things that matter to most of us in our everyday lives.
What song would you dance to at party conference?
I love Beyonce. Now I can only think of the one I danced to at my wedding, which was Crazy in Love.
Well, that was the bell that you could hear sounding there, the division bell, because she had to go and vote in Parliament, but she'd rather stay and talk about Beyonce, it turned out, which I was very happy about. So now, Lewis, she was talking to me about Beyonce. She talked to you about Sabrina Carpenter the other day, because, of course, she got into a whole fix about all of that. Now, listen to Lewis's interview 4 years on. He was the first one to interview her after the spring statement.
And these cuts that you've announced recently just showing that we are moving towards austerity 2.0?
Oh, no. I mean, this is a far cry from what we saw in the Conservative years. In the budget last year, compared to what I inherited from the Conservatives, we put £190 billion into the day-to-day spending of government.
There's around 1 million people, young people, out of work. We need to boost defence to help defend Ukraine. Some people would say, well, why don't you force those 18-year-olds who are not working to join the military, bring in national service?
I'm not in favour of national service, but there are vacancies in our armed forces and we need to recruit more people.
You're taking a bit of flack for accepting Sabrina Carpenter tickets, but what's your favourite Sabrina Carpenter song?
In the job that I'm doing now, it is harder to do some of those normal everyday things. Now, don't get me wrong, this job is a privilege of my life, but I do now have security and just doing things like, going to a pop concert, which I'd love to be able to do with my kids. I just can't do that in the way that I could before. I did enjoy the song, so please, please, please.
I mean, Lewis, when you saw Rachel Reeves right after the spring statement, did you get the sense that she felt relieved having delivered it, or did she still seem very anxious about how it was going to go down?
She was very smiley when we did the interview. I feel like she'd probably been preparing for that moment for a long time, and obviously she prepared for my interview for even longer. But it did feel like she felt like she could let her hair down a little bit. That Sabrina Carpenter question, I did not expect I was going to get an answer on. What
she enjoyed that question.
Yeah, by the end of it, she enjoyed it. But I thought it was quite interesting on the podcast that you did 4 years ago, which is great if anyone wants to listen back. It's really interesting to see how much she's changed. But she talked about how she was a superstar at chess at school. And I feel like it's sort of like she's playing chess now. She's making her big moves at the start of the game. We don't really know if the overall plan is going to work. And she's it feels like she's making calculated moves that we really won't know if they're going to work until the end of the chess game or the end of the Parliament.
What I love about putting those two clips side by side is it shows the difference in tone between opposition and government, right? She was so much more restrained when she was talking to you, even though they did an excellent job of getting answers out of her. Whereas when I interviewed her, she was in the shadow cabinet, and yet she was so relaxed. And I mean, they were, 3 years out from a general election. They looked like they had absolutely no prospect of winning power at that point. I guess she could be relaxed, but she's definitely had to sort of tighten up, hasn't she, since she's gone into government?
It's more than that, though, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of slightly sad in a way,
watching
watching it,
people.
because you can just see, when you interviewed her, she was sort of lively, laughing, chatty, and then the cares of office, right? It's astonishing the way they weigh on you. I mean, she almost looks like a different person just because she's not as animated. And, you know, I don't want to say, oh God, it's I don't know whether this is tactless, but she looks much older. And,
They do say people look a lot older when they leave office.
And it is, and I think a lot of that is just the pressure on you. Yeah. I don't think any of us should underestimate, particularly if you're Chancellor at such a difficult time, and you've had to do so many controversial things. The pressures are absolutely enormous.
If you search on the internet for photos of prime ministers in particular when they enter office and when they leave, and even if they only leave 2 or 3 years later, as we've had with Theresa May and Boris Johnson, the change is extreme. I mean, Boris Johnson had COVID, so you got to give him.
He hasn't gone grey yet, like Stan.
But the thing that was
the change.
But the thing, the person who I experienced this most starkly about, because obviously I've been doing this
forever,
taking interest in this for far too long. But I remember, so in the run up to the 1997 election, John Major just looked more and more weary and older, and then literally within about a month or two of losing the election, he looked about 10 years younger. It was extraordinary.
It's quite similar with Ed Miliband. Like when he was leader of the opposition, he was terrible with the media, and now he's not. I mean, he's got responsibility, but not as much responsibility. He is so relaxed.
Yeah, and ditto Rishi Sunak. Right, I've seen Rishi Sunak since he lost the election, and he not in a personal capacity, in a work capacity I had, and he looks a much happier man and a much younger man, actually, even though he was a relatively youthful prime minister.
I think one should just not underestimate, you know, whether you're a chancellor, and in particular, so one of the things that ministers tell me is, and I wonder how any of us would cope, but if you get the top level of security clearance and, you know, you sit on the various national security committees, the things you get told about the threats to the nation are stuff that I think most people would prevent most people sleeping at night, right? And you just have to, you get told it, and you got to you can't tell anybody about it. And so I do genuinely think that one underestimates the sort of burden that is put on these people.
Yeah, how do they sleep at night? I mean, there's so many things to worry about, not least of all the politics of it all.